Few topics stir up more debate in the adventure world than weight. Sure, there's reliability, there's performance, comfort, but the topic of weight seems to always come back as a reoccurring theme. So when KOVE announced their new 800X was going to weigh just 185 kilograms, all fueled up, the internet blew up. It almost seemed too good to be true.
So, is it?
In their first teasers, KOVE advertised a wet weight of just 185 kilos. For reference, a KTM 890R comes in at 215, while a Tenere sits at around 205. That's like 20 kilos less than basically anything on the market. Figure that is hard to believe. Nowadays, their own manual states 190 kilos on the scales, while independent media like MCN clocked the KOVE in at roughly 196 kilos.
That's 11 more than their original promise. It seems like, at the end of the day, it was too good to be true.
While these new numbers don't look as impressive, they do feel more realistic. And ultimately, weight on a scale is just a part of the equation. How that weight feels on the trails is what really matters. And I have to say, it feels pretty darn good. This was the lightest feeling midweight adventure bike I've ever ridden. Any way you put it, you feel the lack of weight, especially when comparing it to bikes like my CF Moto MTX. It flicks in and out of corners gracefully, taking no effort to lean from side to side. You go to pick it up, and despite not having a low pivot point, it's not a struggle fest like the Teneres of this world. When you slow down the pace and have to balance yourself, the KOVE does really well too. Given its low weight, it doesn't take much rider input in order to control it. Genuinely, it's one of the most agile feeling adventure bikes, at least from the ones I have tried so far. Really a good surprise.
That being said, you need to understand one thing. When I'm making all of these remarks, they are made in the context of this motorcycle. And that context is its class, midweight adventure bikes. Yes, for such beast, it feels pretty light, but it's still a midweight.
You can never compare it to classes below, like a KTM 690, let's say. Well, that is true. The low scale indicator and balanced center of mass really make this KOVE a great handling bike in the woods. This begs the question, how did they do it? Ultimately, there can't be one particular item that instilled these weight savings. And while I haven't seen any engineering diagrams, here's my theory. What KOVE did was they tried saving weight from multiple components at the same time. If we look at the manual, we can see its rated low capacity of just 150 kilos. That's rider, pillion, luggage, all added up.
Now, this is a pretty low number. It would mean that for a lot of people, even riding with a pillion might send them over the weight limit. And that's without adding any extra luggage.
This tells me that most likely its subframe is lighter, thinner, not as strong. And if you look at other bits like the swing arm, it just doesn't look as beefy as my MTX, for example. While I can only speculate, I think KOVE decided to reduce the size of some parts, making them thinner and ultimately not as strong. Look, for solo riding, I actually don't think this is an issue. But I do think that's how the Chinese manufacturer managed to put together all of those weight savings. It's telling to their philosophy. A philosophy best described by the words light and agile. It wants to be a big enduro bike. With a slim front end, it creates the illusion of a smaller machine. The entire cockpit is closer to the rider. It feels smaller when stepping foot over, and thus more controllable. For me, as an altitude limited person, this is honestly pretty great. The ergonomics are spot on, it's easy to grab the bike with your knees and never let go. The geometry makes it stable even at lower speeds, despite the fuel being kept higher than on other competitors. For a long travel adventure bike, its seat height is also not that intimidating. That being said, the seat on this particular example was a lower version, but still. Add up the enduro style grips, the simple controls and solid feeling switchgear, all building towards an image of sturdiness. Same thing with its design, maybe a bit utilitarian, but aggressive and svelte. It's an adventure bike that dreamed of becoming an enduro racer when it grew up. You know what this reminds me of? When Yamaha first teased their T7, the hopes and dreams people put in that prototype. The Tenere was supposed to be a bare bones, simple motorcycle that came with serious off-road credentials to the table. While the Japanese nailed the reliability and simplicity aspects, it ended up feeling way too top-heavy and unapproachable for many riders. Its suspension also proved to be a massive point of contention, and I can't help but feel like KOVE tried achieving what Yamaha initially failed to. A bike without complicated electronics, just a couple riding modes and ABS. No quick shifter, no cruise control, just the basics. Unlike the Yamaha, its fuel tank spans underneath the seat, thus improving the center of mass. Better suspension, bigger ride height, more power, just a more capable off-road machine.
That's what the KOVE managed to achieve, while feeling way lighter than the T7s of this world. But unlike the Japanese bike, KOVE doesn't have the same reliability reputation. And I'm afraid that as long as they're using a KTM base for their engine, they might never achieve that status.
This is a controversial topic when talking about this Chinese motorcycle, and it's not for the camshaft reason. This looks like a copy of the well-known LC8C platform. From my research, it seems that, unlike CF Moto, KOVE didn't have a direct licensing agreement with KTM. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that being said, it feels like a KTM power plant with the exact same characteristics.
They said they had reworked the top end, but ultimately, it's a nice engine, at least when it comes to feel and power delivery. It sounds really good in stock form, and it's clear their engineers thought things through.
Like putting the cat back next to the swing arm, so it doesn't boil the oil in your shock or set fire to autumn leaves.
On the other hand, some aspects clearly needed more work. When it came out, some people called their fueling situation as unrideable. This is an updated version, and it's nowhere near as bad.
When pushing the engine high in the revs, when you really get aggressive, the throttle response is pretty much perfect. The issue sits at the other end of the scale, when you're sitting at lower revs trying to gain some traction. The bike hesitates. It's like you either get idle or 3000 RPM, nothing in the middle.
Look, I'm sure this can be improved with aftermarket fuel controllers and dyno tunes. Ultimately, it's a mapping issue. But as of now, this is nowhere near as smooth as the response of my MTX, bike which was never known for its smoothness.
It's an issue that KOVE seems to be battling with on their 450s as well, and so far, they haven't really figured it out. Another example of this lies within its electronics. On one hand, they got a lot of things right. The dashboard is big and bright, their menu system is really intuitive, simple to use. You only get 2 ride modes, both working pretty well. The bike comes with tubeless wheels and tire pressure sensors. And unlike many others, the KOVE allows you to fully disable the ABS, both front and rear. That is awesome. Almost a perfect system. Almost.
You see, for all the good, there's some things that could have been better. Sure, you can completely take out the ABS, but there is no shortcut for it. You have to go in the menus. And while that's not too bad as its menu is simple, where it's let down is you can't disable it while moving. And that's just not that great.
Also, surprisingly, the throttle is cable operated. That's not inherently bad, but it does mean this bike doesn't and can't have cruise control. I understand the limitation, but if I'm going to critique any midweight ADV for not having cruise, I have to critique the KOVE too. I've said it before, maybe controversial, but these days there's no excuse to omit such system. And for some, it's even a deal breaker. Remember, ultimately, the KOVE is an adventure bike. It has to do everything well. It's not a race machine, especially since this is not the rally version. The electronic story goes even deeper. While we were out testing, not once but twice, the bike simply refused to start. It would come to life only to shut down by itself after a second or so. It took multiple key restarts in order to get it going again. This might be a freak accident and definitely anecdotal, but weird bugs like this can make people question the bike's dependability. They're bugs that can be addressed with software updates, but bugs nevertheless. Also, while their dealer network is expanding rapidly, it's still nowhere near the level of more established brands. I understand KOVE as a whole is a young, emerging company. But if you're buying a new bike, as of now, your support mileage may vary. I hope they can iron out all of these software issues, because afterwards, only time will tell how this lightweight ADV is going to age.
I want it to be solid, reliable, because the experience you get when pushing this motorcycle on off-road trails is really great.
The suspension had good travel, and in our tested setup it proved to be a little stiff at slow speeds. But once you got going and pushed a bit harder, it managed to inspire tons of confidence. It never bottomed out and always stayed in line, aided by its standard steering damper. And look, if you do want a plusher ride, the KOVs are fully adjustable. It's a really good off-road oriented setup that doesn't compromise on things like the turning circle or clutch pull. Its brakes do a more than adequate job of stopping. That's the thing. From an off-road riding point of view, this is a really complete setup. It's balanced, doesn't seem to lack anything in particular. I really loved pushing it through the woods.
Here's the thing. Where I live, the KOVE comes in at just 9,000 euros. A really attractive price point, but a level where one could expect some compromises to be made.
And KOVE had to compromise in some areas. Things like the levers, they don't feel as solid as CF Moto ones. Also, you only get adjustability on the brake side. In Europe at least, they only sell the quickshifter as an add-on. Stock, the bike comes with no handguards. I realize that most stock guards aren't that sturdy, but with the KOVE, you can't even benefit from basic roost and wind protection. Not without paying a visit to the aftermarket. And then there's some other things that I would consider questionable. From factory, this motorcycle comes equipped with crash bars. That's great.
Except, according to the owner, these might not be the sturdiest examples, as he had seen another bike where the bars failed at the welds during an incident.
The windshield is non-adjustable, which means that you either don't get much wind protection or you risk hitting it with your chin when riding aggressively.
From stock, the bike comes with a low fender, which for a bike that clearly focuses more on the off-road aspects, that makes no sense.
Similar to a T7, the shift rod is left out and exposed, meaning a rock can suddenly end your trip. Just like it happened to Paul Tares recently. That's the thing. After getting to ride the KOVE, it can be a bit tricky to understand. Who's this bike really for? Because realistically, they had to make a lot of compromises. And again, this is not the hardcore rally version. It's supposed to be more well-rounded. You can say a lot of it was done in order to save weight, but a quick shifter and the ride-by-wire system don't really add much to the scale. Neither would cruise control. It's a bike that, theoretically, you can't really use for two-up riding. That's why, in a way, the use case for the KOVE narrows down. But what you're left with is a bike that, for a lot of people, is exactly what they needed. A no-frills machine, one without 10 settings of traction control, just on or off. For the rider that, when reaching the end of the road, likes to get rid of all the nannies and control the motorcycle themselves. And I can see that. In a way, I am that guy.
It's for people who want a Tenere with better off-road performance, lighter weight, and at a much better price. But also, people who don't necessarily need the holy reliability of a Japanese bike. When looking at it through this lens, this KOVE makes a lot of sense.
I think, with the way they built this motorcycle, they didn't try to compete directly with KTM or Yamaha. They kind of went their own way. Then, when you factor in the price point, there is really only one competitor, the CF Moto 800 MTX. In fact, this is my MTX. In this budget range, these are the only two serious off-roaders I can think of. And if we're talking about taming the trails, the KOVE is simply better. It's more flickable, more agile, lighter.
But, I said it before, these are adventure bikes. They are meant to do a multitude of things, and when you factor that in, the CF might be a better fit for many. Sure, it's heavier, but it's a more complete package.
If you want a bike that's good on the street as well, the creature comforts of the CF put it one step above. It's more refined. While it seems like they are direct competitors, I actually think they address completely different needs. Rather than compete, I'd say they complement each other beautifully. The MTX wants to be a budget KTM, with all its bells and whistles. The KOVE aims to become a better Tenere alternative. Two different philosophies aiming at two different types of people.
At the end of the day, what KOVE built here is seriously impressive. The way this motorcycle handles off-roading is at the topmost of levels. I genuinely loved pushing it through the woods.
Sure, I can critique many of its aspects. At the same time, we have to remember, all these bikes have become so good that sometimes we kind of have to nitpick in order to find differences. If you look at all the downsides I listed, some may not matter to you at all, and that's fine.
At 9,000 euros, this is a motorcycle that makes adventure off-road riding fun, enjoyable, and simply the fact that we have options like it and the MTX is a great thing for us riders.
Making adventure affordable and fun. We should be thankful to have them. If you ask me, for off-roading, especially at higher speeds, it's hard to find a more enjoyable motorcycle. It's not the most rounded or well-balanced package, but for many, it doesn't need to be. That's the real story of the KOVE 800X Pro.